Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kelly O'Donnell in Washington. And we begin with that very fragile ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran amid a new wave of Israeli attacks in the region that have infuriated Iranian officials who are responding by reasserting Tehran's control over the Strait of Hormuz. This morning, Israel unleashed another wave of attacks in Beirut as part of its ongoing offensive against the Iranian-backed Hezbollah. It follows a series of bombardments yesterday, which, according to Lebanese officials, killed more than 250 people, including nearly 100 in Beirut. Now, Iran claims that Israel's actions are a clear violation of its ceasefire agreement with the U.S., but the Trump administration is insisting that Lebanon was not part of any deal.
I think the Iranians thought that the ceasefire included Lebanon, and it just didn't. We never made that promise. We never indicated that was going to be the case. What we said is that the ceasefire would be focused on Iran, and the ceasefire would be focused on America's allies, both Israel and the Gulf Arab states.
Lebanon is not part of the ceasefire. That has been relayed to all parties involved in the ceasefire. This will continue to be discussed, I am sure, between the President and Prime Minister Netanyahu, the United States and Israel, and all of the parties involved. But at this point in time, they're not included in the ceasefire deal.
However, it seems the administration is clearly concerned about those strikes in Lebanon. According to a senior administration official, during a phone call yesterday, President Trump personally asked Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu to scale back Israel's strikes on Lebanon to help ensure the success of the upcoming negotiations with Iran. And the president telling our colleague Peter Nicholas in a phone call this morning that Israel will be scaling back its attacks and saying, quote, I spoke with Netanyahu, and he's going to low-key it. I just think we sort of have to be a little more low-key, the words of the president. Prime Minister Netanyahu now says Israel is seeking direct negotiations with Lebanon as soon as possible. President Trump also telling NBC News he remains very optimistic that a deal with Iran is in reach and that Iran is agreeing to all the things they have said to agree to. Remember, they've been conquered and they have no military. That's the impression, the assessment of President Trump. Now, despite those claims from President Trump, Iran continues to exert its authority over the Strait of Hormuz. The White House says Iran has agreed to reopen the vital waterway. But after Israel strikes, Iran says it remains closed and marine traffic right now remains at a virtual standstill. That is also according to analysts at S&P. Only 5 vessels were able to pass through the strait today. Normally, that number is well above 100. Today's Iran state media read a new statement they say is from the supreme leader, in which he says Iran will enter a new phase in the management of the strait, and that Iran is praying for a decisive victory, whether it be through negotiations or on the battlefield. Now, of course, it's important to note that we have not actually seen or heard from the new supreme leader himself since the war began, when he was reportedly injured in that first major salvo of strikes. So joining me now is NBC News White House correspondent Garrett Haake. Our chief international correspondent, Keir Simmons, is in Saudi Arabia, and also NBC News business and data correspondent Brian Cheung. All of you here to help us understand all of this. Garrett, let me start with you. What do you make of the fact that the president is saying that Netanyahu needs to scale back and that he has sent that message?
Yeah, I think it tells us a lot about where Iran's red lines are in this negotiation. The idea, as the vice president suggested, that Lebanon was left out of the initial ceasefire was in contrast with everything that the Iranians were saying. And to your point about what we know about ship traffic, the strait wasn't opening up. The Iranians felt like Lebanon needed to be the part of the deal. And I think that may be why we saw the president reach out to Netanyahu and say something has to be done on this point to get what the U.S. thinks it's getting out of a ceasefire deal. And so I think, it should probably be looked at as a positive development for any number of reasons, but it suggests that the president is willing to throw his political weight around here to get to an agreement that ultimately is acceptable to both sides.
Do we have a sense of how the president is assessing the degree of traffic moving through the Strait of Hormuz? He said it has to be opened, and yet the data says it is still a constrained space. Do we get any sense that the president has a level of tolerance for where it stands right now?
Well, he's posted about this a couple of times, saying that the strait has to be open, that's his expectation. Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, took a couple of questions on this point yesterday that, in the White House's view, free transit of the strait means free transit, that a toll or some kind of metered system by the Iranians would not be acceptable. But I haven't detected any significant amount of haste around this or of impatience from the White House yet. I think there's an understanding, you heard some of this from J.D. Vance, that even the communication of the details of this ceasefire might take some time within Iran, and it might take some time for things to settle down after some 40 days of war. So I don't get the sense that anyone is particularly panicked about, the lack of movement thus far before these talks now scheduled for Saturday start in earnest.
You get the sense the president is not quite so patient when it comes to his relationship with NATO. He has been so critical publicly, and he also had an opportunity to meet with the Secretary General and to convey his thoughts on that. What do we know about how that meeting went? What are the signs of how frank and candid it really was?
Yeah, to use the Washington euphemism for a very challenging meeting. I think that's appropriate, Kelly, because we've not seen these two men appear on camera, which is very unusual for two men who do have, by all accounts, a very good personal relationship. And we've heard from Mark Rutte at a couple of interviews here domestically in which he's mostly dodged questions about what exactly the president told him about his patience level with NATO and what steps he might take to either punish it or bring it up to speed. I mean, you mentioned a lack of patience with NATO. I would say, given the vociferousness with which the president complained about NATO going back to his first term, in some ways he has been patient in the sense that he's been banging on NATO for going on 10 years now, and the U.S. is still a member. But I think we're probably going to see more from Rutte and more from the president about specific steps to bring the alliance along in these conversations about what happens next in Iran, or else we're going to see a lot more frustration and perhaps some action from the president, because it's pretty clear he wasn't satisfied with what he heard from Rutte the other day.
I take your point on it being a long-term punching bag for sure. Let me turn now to Keir. Let's talk about Israel and Lebanon. And where do you think things stand right now with movement toward negotiations that could bring some of the hostility, some of the tension, and the unpredictable nature of things, perhaps calming that down?
Well, I think the Israeli government, let's put it this way, is highly skeptical of the potential for negotiations to achieve what it wants to achieve. It has been targeting Hezbollah through this war, and then it launched that massive onslaught on Beirut in the past 24 to 48 hours. And that, the Israeli government says, was targeting Hezbollah. It's killed, according to the Lebanese health ministry, 300 plus people. And for Lebanese, it has been an incredibly traumatic period, right at the end of all of this, right when the ceasefire was being announced. And the Israelis say there is no ceasefire in Lebanon, even though they are prepared to talk. So I think Prime Minister Netanyahu is doing what he feels he needs to keep the Trump administration on board, and probably no more than that, because the Israelis clearly continue to assess a threat from Hezbollah that they want to confront.
Of course, you are coming to us from Saudi Arabia, and you get a sense that some of the partner nations in that part of the world are looking at the situation with fragile ceasefire in one place, still hostilities between Israel and Lebanon in another, and how that impacts all of them. What is your take today?
Yeah, I will tell you, Kelly, it's been quiet here today. We saw a fighter jet. We couldn't quite identify overhead some hours ago. But this is a place where we are now in Saudi Arabia that has been bombarded. Bahrain is just across the water behind me again, has been bombarded through the war. But there have been pretty much no attacks through this recent hours. That Kuwait says that there was something. That there's clearly a scaling down of the attacks by Iran, and you have to say that that is I think a good indicator that they are serious about these talks, but they are also serious about gaining from the talks. And the statement that we heard from Iran's new supreme leader, that I think indicates just how hard line Iran is going to be as it gets into these talks. Things like expecting sanctions to be lifted, still wanting control of the Strait of Hormuz. These are going to be very, very difficult days.
The Strait, of course, is a key lever for Iran, and there was some discussion from the foreign minister there about planting mines in the Strait. Are you getting a sense that there has been any movement on that? That, of course, is a very volatile step for them to take if that has, in fact, happened.
Yeah, if it has happened. The difficulty is, and this is part of why the Strait of Hormuz, where 20% of the world's oil passes normally, that is part of why it's turned out to be such a potent weapon for Iran, because effectively all the Iranians need to do is to say that there's a threat, and that then becomes a threat that shipping companies are going to be worried about. And we haven't seen a huge uptick in the number of ships passing through the Strait because they are very cautious. In terms of insurance and in terms of their people on these ships, they are large, lumbering pieces of metal, easily targeted. So certainly, I think that question of mines, the question of the remaining missile capability, drone capability that the Iranians possess, they will be seeing that in Tehran as their leverage, and they're going to be going into these talks with that kind of weapon, if you like, still pointing at this region. And there is deep, deep unhappiness in this region about the way that the Gulf countries have been targeted. I mean, much of their geopolitical approach has been thrown up in the air by all of this. And that's something that's going to take time to resolve, no matter what the outcome of the talks are.
And you gave us sort of that reality check about how the business world also has a vote in this. So that takes me now to Brian. And markets, again, closing in the green today. And as we're trying to understand how Wall Street is responding to this, what do you think caused green to be so prominent today, given the events that are actually unfolding?
Yeah, well, look, I think that this fragile ceasefire does still remain fragile, but markets actually opened the day in the red, and it seemed like the bounce back that you see on that screen ahead of you, which took place around the later part of the morning, really had to do with some of the commentary that we've been hearing out of the Middle East, that Israel was opening up conversations with Lebanon, and for that reason, it does seem like markets are more optimistic that the trend, at least as of the last few headlines over the past, let's say, 24 hours, does point to this ceasefire holding than it does to the opposite. Now, I should point out that we're not out of the woods yet. And in fact, I've seen notes from investors in my inbox today that said I would not say that we are making any notable changes in our portfolio. That coming from one portfolio manager that actually has to decide where in this market do they place money. So the overall story today isn't really different than it was prior to the announcement of the ceasefire, which is that the volatility in these markets, Kelly, those big up days, big down days, remains the story, because no one can predict how this ends until there is a more permanent resolution to all of this. It seems like that rocky road will remain the theme on Wall Street.
And another key factor we've all been watching, oil prices. Today they jumped compared to yesterday. Oil markets appearing overly optimistic yesterday about the ceasefire, perhaps. What is your sense of what oil is telling us about conditions?
Yeah, and crude oil barrels settling at around $98 does suggest that there's a bit of a change in the oil market thinking on this ceasefire when you consider that it was a little bit closer to $92, $93 yesterday. But we still need to point out that those crude oil prices were really flirting with $120 in the lead up to the ceasefire. So it's still down dramatically. But again, another point of comparison that I should point people to is that we're still well above where we were pre-war, when crude oil barrels were trading somewhere between $60 and $70. So even when you take a look at the recent price action, you have to zoom out to realize oil prices are not going to go back to those pre-war levels. Analysts that I've spoken to in the last few days have said you should not expect to see that anytime soon, in part not only because we aren't seeing the massive flow of tankers through the Strait of Hormuz, as you were just talking about with Keir, but also because of the fact that even if those floodgates open on ships actually moving through there have been so much damage to those oil-producing facilities in that region that it's going to take years in some cases to rebuild the capacity of oil coming out of that area. And for that reason, that could lead to elevated oil costs in the medium term. So even if the ceasefire holds, there is reason to think that the damage has already been done to the global economy.
And the price people pay in their budgets and at the pump, that'll continue to be a pain point. Thank you, Brian. We appreciate your time. New comments from Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu this afternoon, telling Israelis there is no ceasefire with Lebanon, and Israel is continuing to strike Hezbollah targets, quote, with force. Now, that's despite earlier today saying he was open to direct talks with Lebanon's government. Sources tell NBC News that direct negotiations between Israel and Lebanon are under discussion to take place as early as next week. Netanyahu's vow to keep striking Hezbollah seems to go against President Trump telling our colleague Peter Nicholas at a phone call today that Israel was going to scale back its attacks in Lebanon, saying, quote, I spoke with Bibi and he's going to low-key it. I just think we have to be sort of a little more low-key. Those are the words of the president. Joining me now is Ophir Falk, the chief foreign policy advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. We're so pleased to have you with us today. Thank you for making time.
Thank you for having me, Kelly.
Thank you. Appreciate it. President Trump is trying to send a message that he believes Israel will scale back, that he has delivered that message to the prime minister. But we're also understanding that Mr. Netanyahu says there are targets in Hezbollah related to Hezbollah in Beirut that he wants to strike. So where does it stand right now? Is there a scaling back, or is there ongoing forceful attacks inside Beirut?
Well, there was no real need to ask to scale back, because the hit yesterday was the hardest hit that we hit Hezbollah since the pager operation, where we took out hundreds of Hezbollah terrorists. We took out hundreds of Hezbollah terrorists yesterday, and clearly we're going to be hitting different places. And as the Prime Minister said, there is no ceasefire with Hezbollah. We have to degrade their capabilities. And if there's one thing that we've learned from the October 7th atrocity, is that we cannot have a genocidal terrorist organization on our border. We can't have Hamas on our border in the south, in Gaza, and we can't have Hezbollah on our border in the north, in Lebanon.
So when we hear the president using the phrase, we need to low-key it a little bit, we need to scale back, that's not happening.
Well, the Prime Minister and the President have had the greatest cooperation. They have the greatest cooperation and coordination throughout the war. At the greatest cooperation I've ever seen between a President and a Prime Minister, and between our armed forces, between the American and the Israeli armed forces. We're partners in war, and we're also partners in peace.
But on this point, apparently there is a disagreement if they see it so differently. Scaling back and going forward are not the same thing.
Actually, we are in complete agreement between the Prime Minister and the President.
Let me move on to a different point. The World Health Organization says the evacuation order for Beirut includes 2 major hospitals, and there are no alternative medical facilities available to receive the 450 patients from those hospitals. And they're calling on Israel to reverse that order. Will Israel comply in that way?
Well, Israel will take that into consideration. Israel does everything possible to mitigate, to minimize the harm to civilians. We always do. At the same time, Hezbollah and the Iranian regime and Hamas does everything possible to put civilians in harm's way. They use civilians as human shields. That's what they do on all the fronts, and we do everything possible to minimize the harm to civilians. And we'll continue to do that. But the terrorists, the Hezbollah terrorists, will not have immunity. They can hide or they can run, but they can't hide. And we'll get them. We've taken out over 1,000 Hezbollah terrorists since they launched the war against us, and we'll continue to do what is needed to secure the Israeli citizens.
Is there a sense that having conversations, trying to get to some sort of agreement with Lebanon and to deal with Hezbollah at the negotiating table, do you believe that's actually going to happen? How realistic is that?
Well, our goal in the negotiations with Lebanon is to dismantle Hezbollah and to reach a peace agreement with Lebanon. That is the exact same, that's a mutual interest for the Lebanese people and the Lebanese government, is to forge peace with Israel and to dismantle Hezbollah, which has taken the Lebanese people hostage for years. In this operation, we've been able to degrade Hezbollah's capabilities significantly, and we're going to continue to degrade their capabilities. And that is what has enabled the negotiations between the Lebanese government and Israel to continue degrading and to dismantle Hezbollah and to forge a historic peace, possibly an historic peace between Lebanon and Israel, peace through strength.
We understand the Lebanese government has expressed a powerlessness to control Hezbollah. Do you accept that? And do you think that is an impediment to trying to get anything done through negotiations?
Sorry, can you repeat that question, Kelly? I had a problem.
Sure, no problem. The Lebanese government has talked about its inability to stop Hezbollah, to control Hezbollah. Do you think that's a serious impediment to having any kinds of negotiations?
Well, clearly, we had a ceasefire agreement in November 24. That was a clear agreement that the Lebanese government needed to dismantle Hezbollah and demilitarize southern Lebanon. That did not happen. That did not happen. Either it's because of a lack of will or a lack of capability, but it did not happen. And that's what forced our hand now to go back into Lebanon again after we were attacked. And that's what we're doing right now. We're degrading Hezbollah, and we're demilitarizing southern Lebanon, and we're not going to let this genocidal terrorist organization anywhere near our border. Now that Hezbollah has been degraded significantly, Lebanon, or maybe the Lebanon government, can step up to the plate and to do the right thing and to continue to degrade and to dismantle Hezbollah. And that's what we're going to be talking about, amongst other things. That's what we're going to be talking about in the negotiations.
There'll be another set of negotiations coming up in Pakistan where the U.S. will be dealing with Iran. Israel is not a party to those negotiations. What does Israel want to see come out of that?
Well, our objectives in Operation Roaring Lion were to remove the existential threat posed by the Ayatollah regime, including their nuclear capabilities, their ballistic missile capabilities, and to create the conditions for the Iranian people to do the right thing and to take their destiny into their own hands. What have we achieved so far in this war? We've degraded their nuclear capabilities significantly, including by taking out an additional key nuclear bomb scientists. We've taken out thousands of missiles. We've degraded their capability of producing additional missiles. We've taken out hundreds of launchers. In terms of the regime, we've taken out their key leadership.
Do you consider that regime change, though, sir?
Leadership.
Removing personnel, do you think it's regime change?
Part of it is to remove the Ayatollah regime. That is part of it. And to create the conditions, that's part of creating the conditions for the Iranian people to take their destiny in their own hands. Sooner or later, this regime will fall. It will fall.
We so appreciate your time and your insights today. Thank you for opening your schedule for us today. Ophir Falk, thank you so much for your time. And groups in Lebanon. Thank you, sir. Groups in Lebanon say more than 1 million people have been displaced in the last 5 weeks as violence has intensified across the country, creating a dire humanitarian situation. Families have been arriving to shelters with very little, many struggling to feed themselves. Chef Jose Andres' World Central Kitchen has been working around the clock to help feed some of these families. I spoke last hour with the chef leading those operations, Aline Kamakian, and I began by asking her to describe what the last few days have been like in Beirut, where she has been working. Let's watch.
Yesterday was, everybody was waiting a ceasefire, but instead we had an unexpected, huge bombing everywhere. 100 targets in 10 minutes, they said, but it was a nightmare for us. Almost simultaneously, different neighborhoods in Beirut were hit by very heavy bomb. Loud explosions, everywhere, smoke rose up from all sides, blood everywhere. It was like the several strikes were in the busy commercial areas, densely populated areas. It reminds me of the port explosion, where the dust was that shocked you, the smell of the blood, the sound of the sirens, everything is very heavy. People is desperate, and people are every place where people and injured people and all the cars were transformed to ambulance. And Ministry of Health was telling, please get out of the street so that we can take the wounded people into hospitals. Hospitals are overcrowded, and they have materials and medicine and needles and everything that is missing because of the heavy injured people that is coming every day and every day. Within a month, we have more than 1.2 million people displaced before yesterday.
And the chaos that you're describing is hard to even comprehend, and the unpredictability of it all. I know that Prime Minister Netanyahu has talked about wanting to have talks with Lebanon. And what do you think the leaders need to hear from someone like you, who is seeing what the real human effect is and the needs are as they head into the potential for some kind of talks?
You know, the need is extremely high. People are living in shelters, which is not ready to be a shelter. It's a school, basically. It's a governmental school. There's no basic needs. There's no toilet. There's no shower. Women and children are condensed in this shelter. It's overcrowded. And anytime epidemic can rise because of the no hygiene whatsoever. We're not ready we don't have shelters. We don't have real protected shelters, well equipped and everything. The need is extremely high. World Central Kitchen is cooking and distributing hot meals, and we're really, we're growing, and we're cooking a lot every day, more and more. But the need is so much.
I understand you're up to more than 1 million meals so far that you and the team have been able to provide, which is obviously just an enormous number and speaks to the depth of the need. And do you get a sense that there is a next step in the work that you're doing for your team? Is your area, is that expanding?
Just while we're talking, we have a new evacuation order right now, bigger than almost half of Beirut should be evacuated. I don't know where we will go. Where should we go? The need is extremely high. Despite the ongoing security challenges, the World Central Kitchen continues to adapt operation. We relocate the kitchen. We're adapting to the situation. We're partnering with local chefs and volunteers. We're coordinating closely with the municipality and government to be able to cook and to distribute. The million is a bittersweet feeling, you know, like we're very proud that we've done this figure, but from the other part, we're heartbroken because we know how many people are still in need. We need today, you know, it's not tomorrow, it's not after 1 month. People are hungry. The need is extremely high, and today you have almost 17% of the population is in acute food insecurity. This means like you have around 900,000 people do not have a secure access to basic food. The number is rising. Lebanon is almost import 80% of its food, especially wheat. We have vegetables and fruits, but the rest is all imported, so extremely expensive. A lot of people will not afford food.
Well, what you are describing certainly gives us a picture of the urgency and the health concerns that can result from the kind of displacement that you're talking about. Thank you for giving us a window into the crisis there. Chef Aline, thank you so much for your time, and we wish you well.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.